So excited to have Jane Samuel here today. Jane and I go back quite a ways now. We met through the Attachment and Trauma Network. In I think 2013 is when we met, somewhere around there.
Yeah, maybe even a little earlier, because it was whatever year that you were doing the movie tour.
Yes, it was. It was probably 2012, actually.
Okay.
Probably 2012. And that's right. And we ended up doing a screening in Louisville, and that was really great. And that's when we got to spend a lot of time together. But I don't think that's when I first met you, is it?
No. Oh, no.
No, we met before that. Yes. So I have come to admire, as a parent, you have been an absolute mentor to me, actually, over the years. Your knowledge and understanding of regulation and OT and the power of in that area, the power that the knowledge of those things can have was really eye-opening for me early in my parenting transformation, actually. And so that's why I really thought you were the perfect person to talk with me on this topic of integrating regulation into your daily life, because you have definitely lived that. I also thought maybe you could introduce yourself and talk about how your parenting journey has led to what you do now professionally.
So as you pointed out, we've known each other a long time. And before we even knew each other, of course, you were forming your family and I was forming mine. And one of our children is adopted and has a history of very early trauma. And in my learning process, which was largely informed by the fact that I just love to read. I guess being a former lawyer, I'm a huge researcher. And so I just knew I needed to know more. So I just attacked things. And then I also encountered other parents, Julie Beam, who runs Attachment Trauma Network, and you and some other parents, not actually involved in ATN, but involved in other support groups that were very helpful in my journey and understanding why my child was acting the way she was, what she was trying to tell me with her behaviors, how I could best help her. And we were very lucky, although it was very hard, we were very lucky to live in Asia when my daughter was in her toddler and preschool years. We had moved there for my husband's job. And her occupational therapist, we could not find an attachment or a trauma therapist there, but we found a very, very well-trained occupational therapist who had a background in understanding attachment, the effect of trauma on development. She had a lot of background in Stanley Greenspan's model, floor time. And she and some trainers that were brought in by the adoption support system in Singapore helped me to understand the intersection of what might at the time have been seen as heavy sensory issues and what my child was experiencing internally, almost like from a felt self, and her development of herself, which was developed differently than other children who hadn't had a history of trauma. So we learned a lot along that path. And then to kind of fast forward, I got very involved in Attachment Trauma Network. I helped with I started their parent journal and therapeutic parenting journal and some other things, going to conferences. And I just found that even as my child grew and healed, really, and our family really formed a strong attachment, I still loved this work, and I still loved the research and the idea of supporting families. And so then I ended up deciding to go ahead and get a whole nother career. And so I went back to graduate school and I studied specifically family science. And I graduated, and my focus was in marriage and family therapy. And through that, I developed an even more specialized interest in theraplay, which is a model, a filial play therapy model, a family play therapy model that's really great for supporting both the child and the parents or the caregivers. I really feel strongly that what we're doing here is a family, is we're working to develop that attachment, heal old perhaps wounds, and maybe even our own, and then move forward in our life journey from a systemic point of view. And so now I'm out practicing, working with individuals and families, some with children with a history of trauma and attachment issues. And in that work, I practice as a marriage and family therapy associate, working toward my full licensure here in my state. So.
That's so amazing. And I think one of the things that I know that you and I share a passion for is really helping parents understand and make the paradigm shifts towards really understanding their children's behavior and why our kids behave the way that they behave. And I think that that's something that, for me, understanding regulation and the ability to self-regulate or not, understanding co-regulation was an absolute, like, I feel like I found the magic key when I the day I can remember where I was sitting when I had that paradigm shift. I was sitting in we lived in a very, very tall, skinny, that's kind of the way they're built there, house in Asia. Couldn't do an apartment with a balcony because we had a child who had no sense of danger. So we were living in this very tall, skinny house, and I was up in my 3rd floor bedroom, and I was alone, and I was really feeling quite desperate. And I was reading, or had just recently read, either my 2 favorite books from that time period were either Dan Hughes's book, Building the Bonds of Attachment, or is that the name of his book? I'm trying to remember. But anyway, or I was reading Keck and Kopecki's book, Parenting the Hurt Child. And both those books kind of culminated in this aha moment that day, with the sun coming in, because it's always either pouring there or sunny. And this realization of, oh my gosh, my child is not doing this to drive me nuts. She's doing this because her system is on fire. And oh gosh, what flooded through me was both an empathy, a sadness that I hadn't gotten it up to that point. And she'd been with us for about 3.5, 4 years, or no, sorry, she'd been with us about 2.5 years at that point. And, you know, I had been loving on her, but I had also, because of my own personal stuff that I needed to work on, which was the other aha I'll tell you about in a minute, realized, I need to give her a lot of grace because she's pushing my buttons, but she doesn't intend to do that. And oh, by the way, I have to give myself grace because guess what? I got all these buttons all over the front of me that are getting pushed because I have my own stuff. And so the second aha was, oh, I really need to work on some of my own stuff as well. So in the end, it ended up being a dual healing, process, but. Absolutely the same for me. I know that I think I have shared with you before, for me, 2 specific moments like that. One was when we had gotten, my daughter used to run her hands along the wall. And when she walked in, we tried everything we could think of to correct that behavior out of her. And we were absolutely convinced that it was a willful behavior, that she was doing it absolutely to drive me out of my mind. Like, I was certain it was just something she was doing specifically to push my buttons. And then we got the results of the sequential trauma assessment and saw that she had proprioceptive deficits. And that moment was like, oh my gosh, she's not trying to make me mad. She's just trying to stay standing upright.
Mm-hmm.
And she's also, not only is she just trying to stay standing upright, but her brain is prioritizing the need to stand upright before she can even consider whether I want her to do this or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Before her brain can get to the part of thinking that.
Yes, I love the way you're pointing at that high brain, like, you know, we have to also give ourselves grace that, oh, my high brain is not working. I think that's why I love Dan Siegel's little model of the brain. It's like, oh, flip my lid. So I'm not going to be able to access any of that, which is, I guess, where regulation comes in, is when we calm and regulate, then, oh, hello, here comes some cognition. If, you know, that's developmentally appropriate, here comes some calming, some maybe rationalization, but yeah.
And then, the second thing, my son, who had really big reactions, really big, I've always said I had one child whose behaviors were more covert and one more overt. You know, Jonah had very big reactions. And he once was frightened. He was frightened, but in my mind, he was angry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he looked angry to me. I didn't know yet. I didn't understand dysregulation, and I didn't understand the trauma trigger.
Mm-hmm.
And I had tried to stop him from hurting somebody else, his sister, actually. I had tried to stop him. And in doing so, in grabbing onto him to stop him, he bit me, and bit me hard. And I remember in that moment, it was right after reading Dan Siegel's book. I was just hit with this moment of, oh, this is terror. He's in terror.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can soothe him, then he'll let go. And he did. And it was the first time I actually tried soothing him in a moment like that, instead of correcting him in a moment.
Instructing, like controlling. Yeah.
So those two moments for me were those, oh, there's a magic key here that I have to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And then that's when we started to become very, very intentional about implementing regulation, not only as a response to behavior, but into every single day. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about how you did that in your home?
Mm-hmm. And how I'm doing it now for myself during the pandemic. Because, you know, you're talking about regulation, but I think a way of just simplifying it and distilling it all the way down is, oh, you're seeing all these resources for the pandemic for adults. What are some of the ones that you're seeing? Well, don't watch the news. Okay, why? Because we get dysregulated watching the news. We go into terror. Go and walk in nature. Why? Because science has proven through studies, walking in nature is very regulating, okay? Everything from putting our feet on the floor to looking around and being mindful, drawn out of our worries, okay? So regulation isn't just about children, it's about all of us, and tuning into what do we need. So to back up for a second, what I did back then, one of the big things was I kind of came at it from the occupational route and learned through our occupational therapist that our daughter really needed a sensory play every day. Now, you know, I had 2 other children. I'm playing, I know what play is, but I didn't know what sensory play was. I didn't know that when my children were doing this, they were putting in this information in their body. When they were swinging at the park, when they were jumping on a pogo stick, it was putting this information, and that their body liked it or didn't like it, because every child's different. And I remember which I think is hard at first to hear, but is helpful and free. Helpful because it's free, what I'm about to say. And that is, I remember asking my occupational therapist, what do I do? Like, what do I do every day? Because she said coming here one day a week is not going to be enough. Because she had us, unlike some occupational therapists, she actually had us working together in the room. So we were in there playing together. At first, she said she won't want to involve you, and that was because of her fear and her control and everything. But she got me involved somehow. She'd say little things like, maybe mom has an idea of how to hang up that hammock or whatever. But she said, observe what I'm doing here, but also just go home and play. And I said, okay, but how much do I do? Like, do I do 10 minutes of swinging, and do we do big swinging or do we small? And she said, just observe. She said, just observe and see. Does she get more wild or does she get calmer? And I remember thinking, great, that's no help. That's like I just want you to hand me the answer.
Right.
But what she was teaching me, even though she didn't teach me the word then, she was teaching me attunement. And she was teaching me that by being aware of what my child was doing, I could start to attune to what was going on just with my own eyes and ears. And then being a detective. So attuning is both observing and taking in information, and then being a detective of, okay, what's going on here? Is this going up? Is this going down? Or if we had a come apart, as we sometimes called it, a tantrum, what happened right before this? So you became very good at looking, oh, we turned off the television. And I knew from our developmentalist who we worked with, Dana K. Bonham in California, that turning off the television or any digital device was the breaking of a trance. And so that was dysregulating in itself. But then maybe what we were watching was dysregulating. So a movie, Lady and the Tramp, had a mom who was pregnant and has a baby, and kind of, you know, the doggy, the puppy who she loves kind of gets pushed to the side. Okay, that could be very dysregulating and triggering for a child who has a history like some of our children. So I had to do both those things, and that to me was all part of attunement. And I do that now with myself, and I train my clients to do that. Attune, be aware what's upsetting you, what's not upsetting you. So I didn't have a script. I love the fact that you help us with this Survive and Thrive guide, because you kind of have little places we can fill in with the information we gain from our observation. But it is a matter of slowing things down, watching your child, looking at the behavior, looking at what happened right before. If you're engaged in sensory play of any nature, you know, riding a bike, swimming, going to the park, going down the slide, doing tug of war, doing a whole bunch of great games you can do. Is my child going up? Is my child going down? Are they crashing? Okay. So I learned, both by people telling me to keep my child's life small, but I also learned no big birthday parties, no bouncy castles and all that, which you would think, oh, that's great sensory input. No, a lot of those places that had that, which of course are closed now during the pandemic, they had bright flashing lights. They had too much activity, too many children, too much sound. So that's the way I kind of crafted our day. Then we began neurological reorganization. And that did give me more, kind of like you've done here in a simplified form in Survive and Thrive, a cheat sheet to use. Another cheat sheet was, I used this book,
Yes.
The Out of Sync Child Has Fun. And all of those things, I started to piece together what our day would look like. And obviously there were other things we had to get done. If we were in school, we had to get school done. But then as soon as we got home from school, we allowed time for what some people might have looked at as home occupational therapy, but I was really looking at it as time for relational play. That included sensory.
And we did the same thing too. And when we built the Survive and Thrive packet, what we tried to do was leave in space for attunement, because there's no substitute for that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, there isn't a formula. Like you said, you were wishing she would hand you the formula. And now you and I both know how, even as bad as we both wanted that, because I wanted that too, there is no substitute for that. And once you learn to attune, it's so much more effective anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being able to attune and read your child and go with them where they're going
Mm-hmm.
is so
Mm-hmm.
much more effective, and creates harmony in such a more beautiful way in your household.
Mm-hmm.
And when we built the packet, what we tried to do was break it up into blocks to allow for that, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I wanted to say is, you mentioned the out of sync child. We did that too. That was one of the resources that was a huge go-to for us. I highly recommend that.
And I also highly, because I love Theraplay, I also now highly recommend the book Parenting with Theraplay, or whatever the title is, but it's the book specifically for parents.
Yes.
Because I know that, the Theraplay Institute, it's been around a long time and has heavily researched their model. It is evidence-based, and they've looked into what supports children, what games, what songs, what activities.
Yes.
And they're all things that you and I would recognize from being a child, but they're grouped just kind of like they are in this book, where, okay, you're working maybe on this, or you're doing this now, so you're feeding your child's regulatory system. And I personally think, and I know this is so hard, especially during a pandemic, because we're all, even though we have all this seemingly extra time on our hands because we're staying home, we're stretched farther than we ever could have been, because we're trying to work full-time or part-time and have our children at home. Or even if we don't work outside the home, our work at home, raising our children, has become exponentially tougher, because maybe they're not going to school, or maybe because we can't just go quickly run an errand. So for whatever reason, things have become a lot tougher. So I understand that a quick fix is always great. We always were looking for the magic bullet, the magic pill over the years. I know I was, when I would research all different kinds of therapy. But if you can hang with this idea of the survive and thrive, if you can hang with this idea of building a relationship with your child through regulating play, you are going to actually win so much more, because you are going to be handing them, number one, something they need for life. Number two, you're not going to be slapping a Band-Aid on a problem that's still going to be hiding under the Band-Aid. What I noticed personally with my child is I integrated the sensory play every day and the relational play every day. I noticed a huge healing, and we suddenly, not overnight, but we suddenly went from a couple of years where we could not sleep at night, we could not sit still, we could not do things that required certain developmental tasks that she didn't have that I didn't know. So like arts and crafts, she never could do that. She'd fall on the floor in a tantrum, and I couldn't figure that out. Then I realized that was very dysregulating to her, that she couldn't perceive this. And all of a sudden, over the next year, when I look back, I'm like, oh, now we can do this, now we can do that, now we can sleep at night. So now when I look at my child and how amazing she is, and how amazing each of us are as humans, I realized that this was something that was a gift, even though it was a lot of work.
And yes, absolutely. And I think too, I look back at some of the really creative things that we figured out along the way. Like one of the things I figured out with my kids is, when I picked them up from school, both of them responded totally differently getting picked up from school. So for my son, first of all, I had to re-engineer how I picked them up from school, because actually my daughter got out of school first and my son got out second, but that absolutely could not work for us. Mm-hmm. So I modified his schedule, so I picked him up first so I could pick him up, get him settled with headphones and something to do, and a snack, and get him kind of calm and doing his own thing, because he really needed to kind of go away for a bit after mm-hmm. all of that stimulation. Like, that's what he needed. And then I could pick up my daughter. And what we would do every day when I picked up my daughter is we would set the timer for 2 minutes, and I would say, okay, tell me everything awful that happened while you were away from me for 2 minutes, and then we'll switch to what happened great, you know? So it was 2 minutes of what was awful about the day, because she really needed to connect with me and tell me, I was away from you and it was awful. Mm-hmm. And here's why it was awful. And then she could reset and come back by telling me the great parts of the day. We could shift into that. Once I was able to hear her and receive that from her and acknowledge that, she could shift. But mm-hmm. I think back about that, and I think that was a really great, like, example of that, attuning to what they both needed and then adjusting life so we could mm-hmm. do it.
Well, and I love that example too, because you can see that regulation doesn't always require sensory play the way we look at it. You know, so it didn't require for you taking a trip to the playground with your daughter maybe right away. What it did require was your full attention, and it required that your other child not be, to the best you could do it, obviously nothing's ever perfect, right. That you could devote those 2 minutes to her. But for Jonah, what was required was perhaps some sensory input. So the headphones, giving him someplace, something to do with his hands. So, you know, regulation for me isn't just go to the park or do jumping jacks. It gets back to that attunement. They go right together like this. What does this child need right now? So I think, for example, of my daughter, she would have trouble going into things sometimes. Coming to the dinner table, coming to anything that was going to require her to sit and attend.
Yes.
Because her system was still traveling high. So what I learned was scoop up underneath the arms from behind, and then we would do stomps in. I would lift her, and we would hit the ground with our feet, and lift and hit the ground with our feet. And that was giving her, she needed deep pressure.
Yes.
Or sitting in the dentist's office, she would get anxious. So she would pull me into her lap. She knew what she needed, even though she wasn't verbalizing it. And I realized, okay, we're in an anxious place. We're about to go into the dentist. She's not verbalizing that. She's not telling me she's anxious because she really isn't able to do that. But she can show me with her behavior, Mom, sit in my lap, sit here. And it looked really ridiculous because here's this 7-year-old with a woman who's, you know, in her 40s sitting in her lap, you know, and I would get a few looks in the waiting room. But that was that deep pressure that I learned that on a whim one day when she was absolutely losing it and I didn't know what else to do. And I had read in one of my books, and it might have been The Out of Sync Child, or it might have been Deborah Gray's book, but I learned about the couch sandwich. And so I lifted her up and I put her on the couch. She was having a tantrum, and I put the pillows back on top of her. And I sat very gently, only putting like 25% of my weight on her, squatting on her. And I hear from under the covers, under the pillows, harder, deeper. And I'm like, okay, she likes this. So I sat a little more. And to make a long story short, that's how I learned that she absolutely had to have deep pressure. And then, of course, using my attunement, I noticed, We love carrying in 10 bags of groceries, even though we're 4.5. We've got them lined up on our arms, you know. Or we're going to the park with friends. No, make all the friends get in the wagon, and I insist I have to pull it, even though I'm 4.5. Okay.
Yes.
She wasn't being defiant. She was saying, I'm walking with friends. This is just regulating. I'm overexcited about what I'm going to get to do at the park. Let me calm my body.
She was actually working it out.
Yes, yes.
The other beautiful thing is that a lot of times they are trying to work it out themselves, like in their own.
Stomping. What do our children do when they're upset?
Yeah.
They stomp their feet. What do we do when we're upset? We stomp our feet.
Yeah, yeah. So, so I think that recognizing that and looking back on those little ways that you figure that stuff out, I think is so important. I think that parents now, doing this at home, trying to do it at home, figuring out those things. Like I know a parent who has a child who has, I call it the reflex of throw, you know, like throw. And so what we suggested was get a laundry basket and socks. And so when you start seeing something get thrown, just throw in the laundry basket something that can be thrown, or go outside and throw something that can be thrown, because something about that need to throw, there's something about that need to throw.
Right?
I
guess, you know, I'm thinking it's somehow giving input into the joint.
Yeah.
You know, which you talk about in the Survive and Thrive. You know, a lot of our kids like to pull their knuckles and you know, constantly cracking things because their body is seeking that input. Another one was flipping upside down. So I know my daughter went through about a whole year where she loved flipping upside down. So we did a lot of stuff at the playground where I would hang her upside down. I would spot her, you know.
You just hang there.
Just hang there. But, you know, or deep pressure and upside down, which was watching television on her head on the couch when she was little, you know. But I learned later on, that's why you did that. But I think if I was starting out now, I think if I had to give parents advice, what I would do is take something like the activities you have in the Survive and Thrive, or go get yourself a copy of The Out of Sync Child Has Fun, because this is the one that has the lists of activities, and then experiment. And so that's number one. Get yourself a little cheat sheet. My cohort members and colleagues know I'm all about the cheat sheet. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. So, you know, keep a cheat sheet around, maybe write up some and stick it on the fridge, and just go through, try. Oh, okay, that didn't work. Put a plus or a negative next to it, and just move on. And eventually, if you do that for a couple weeks, you're going to have a list of things that, wow, that seemed to work. Okay. So you've got your list. Number two is give yourself lots of grace. Absolutely. This is not about being perfect. We are working to give our children unconditional love all the time, even when they're not at their best. Okay? That starts within ourselves. That when we can give ourselves unconditional love, you know, the love that Brene Brown talks about, of we're just doing good enough, you know. That is a thing, good enough parenting. So let's embrace that instead of saying, oh, I messed that up. I misread that they like swinging. That was a total disaster. They came home from the park after that swinging and they were so dysregulated. Tomorrow's the new day. If you enjoy the book, Lily's Plastic Purse, read that book if you haven't ever read it. It's for yourself. It's by Kevin, I don't know if he pronounces it Henkes or Henkes, but it's about a little girl who has a really hard day at school. And I love the relationship her teacher shows her. When he hands her back the object that she could not leave alone, which was her plastic purse she brought to school. So he had to take it away, and she was very, very upset. At the end of the day, he handed it back and he said, "Today was a difficult day. Tomorrow will be better."
Yes.
Right?
Yes. That's what I always tell the clients that I work with, is that you get as many redos as your kids do.
Mm-hmm.
Like we all
Mm-hmm.
get redos. And I think that's
And
what
and I think it's even okay to say to a child,
I do.
"Wow, mom had that wrong.
Yeah. I
Whoa,
do.
I thought that maybe you might like if I put some cushions on top of you." Because I have one child who absolutely would have hated that. She doesn't like anything over her head or
Me
anything.
too.
And so, whoa, let's try that again, okay? I wonder if you'd like it if I just put the cushion on your legs and then sat down slowly. Oh, okay, that's better. Yeah. Oh, yeah, because you can see and you can feel and you can move your arms if you need to, you know?
Yeah.
So whatever we're doing with a child, a hug, whatever we're doing, we can always do a redo and just fall on our own sword.
Absolutely.
Because we're teaching our children that it's okay to fall on your sword, that they don't have to be afraid to come home from school or come in from the playground and say, or not say, lie and keep it a secret, that they wailed on another child, which we're all mortified by as parents, but we want them to come to us and say, "I totally lost it. I grabbed this thing from my friend, or I slapped my friend." Oh, yeah.
You lost it. Yep. Yeah. That's hard. Instead of even thinking that the perfection is the goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what we do. And that's where, and I know that as a parent, for me, the hardest thing in the world was what other parents thought.
Mm-hmm.
That was the hardest part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Was easier to embrace my children for who they were and our parenting journey for what it was. And it was easy to do that until I was faced with the judgment of other people, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
that makes it really hard, I think, sometimes. And so
Well,
getting past that is really, I think, important.
yes, yes. And we're going to be judged. We're all going to be judged. And that's just, unfortunately, that's part of human nature. It's
Yes.
the flip side of giving each other grace and everything. Is there are going to be times when none of us are perfect.
Right.
I still, as much as I fight against it, I still have my moments where I judge decisions my children have made or my husband made. But that's my own stuff. I know that that's what's coming up for me, is something I think I see in that. But the other thing is that we have to remember that, I think it's called the spotlight effect, but that idea that people are really looking at us, really the majority of people are not looking at us. They're not judging us. And some of those parents at the checkout line who see us with a child who's losing it, we think they're all thinking, "Wow, can't she control that child? That child is, what a spoiled child." Actually, some of these parents are probably afraid to say anything, but they're sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, I've been there. That poor woman, that poor dad. I wish I could step in for them. I wish I could help, but they might think I'm intruding. They might think I'm judging them." So to also remember that sometimes we lay extra stuff on what we think other people are thinking about us.
Exactly. I have definitely been thinking that for other parents. Oh, I wish I could help, you know?
Yes, 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 yes.
The other thing I wanted to mention too is, we have all these ideas in this packet that we've put together, and it's this big, nice, pretty package, but we don't ever expect for families to be able to integrate that all at once.
Mm-hmm.
Like I always worry that, like for me, it was easy for me to integrate things slowly instead of everything at one time. And I love that you mentioned, coming up with a cheat sheet and trying things here and there, but it doesn't have to be all at once, right?
No, and in fact, I very much advocate against that, because it's kind of like anything in life. if you set your expectations really high, you're just putting so much pressure on yourself and your family. I learned this through, luckily, people advised us of this, and so I followed it. Other parents advised us when we started doing this kind of incorporating time every day to have relationship and regulate, around that, is I started very small. So 5-10 minutes, I love your 2-minute thing. You weren't dedicating a whole 45-minute trip for a cup of tea with your daughter every day when you picked her up. Small. It's like what I teach my clients when I'm teaching the mindfulness and meditation. We don't need to get the whole altar out. We don't need to get, the tablecloth and the incense candles. And we can't do this until we can sit in a lotus position. Literally a 1-minute body scan. And you have now done your first meditation.
Yes.
Okay.
That's beautiful.
Or a walk to the end of the block, counting how many trees. You've done your first mindfulness-based walk.
Right.
Very simple. So if you're one like me, who tends to be an overachiever, lower that bar way down, and say, this week I'm going to just start keeping a list of when my child seems to be losing it and what might have been going on. That's it. That's just your only task for this week, is just to practice that attunement, which I know you're going to have some more on attunement. And then maybe the next week is, I've got 5 things on this thing on the fridge. When I see my child start to maybe, in parent lingo, lose it, I'm gonna reach out in a relational way with one of these things. And then I'm gonna see if that works. So for me, that might have been, oh, it looks like we're losing it. Let me see if I can jump in with some relationships, some fun, which Karen Buckwalter does a good job of incorporating that into her book, Parenting the Challenging Child, or Raising the Challenging Child.
Yes.
But I think of this example that I used myself that's in her book, where maybe you jump down on all fours. Your child's losing it. All of a sudden, they're like, whoa, what's going on? Mom's down on all fours. And then you say, I wonder how fast I can crawl around this kitchen island, And I wonder if you could crawl faster than me. Okay. So what you've just done there is you've connected, or tried to make a connection. You've made it fun, and you're getting in that body input because they're crawling around on all fours. Okay. Might be an epic fail, might not.
Right. We call that in our house a squirrel.
A what?
A squirrel from the movie Up, isn't it?
Yeah.
From yeah. Yeah. Where you create a diversion, a fun diversion really quickly.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
The last thing I wanted to just touch on with you is, we've talked a lot about regulation, and we've talked about the importance of regulating ourselves as parents too. I think that something that happens, I know that took a long time for me to really master, was in the face of really explosive behavior in particular. I think that that's what I notice with parents is really, that's what gets really hard, is when you have kids that have really explosive meltdowns. Being able to regulate yourself so that you can respond in that very quick moment. Like, do you have tips for that? Because I know for me, I really feel like my son was a gift for that for me, because I really did learn from him that absolutely, without a doubt, if I can't get calm when he gets explosive, it's not going to be okay.
Yeah.
I have to learn how to do that. And so for me, it was there was I had a mantra that I would say in my head, and I would just say, strong as steel, steady as stone. in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped me get back to, you know, and then I would get calm, and he would, I would co-regulate with him, and he would get calm too. I wondered if you had any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, a couple quick ones. Number one, if at all possible, and you cannot control yourself, I always give parents the advice of, which I got, take a quick walk around the house. If the child is safe in the home, obviously the child has to be safe in the home. And so obviously what I'm about to say is not going to apply to all situations. But if you have a situation where this could apply, then you go out the front door and you walk around just the perimeter of your house, or you walk up and down the driveway. You give yourself that 10, not 10 minutes, but you know, that mom's going to count to 10 kind of thing. Okay. I've heard people say things like, you know, mom needs to take a break right now so that I don't get more upset and say or do something that I might regret. So figure out what works for you. But I would sometimes do that as long as my child was safe. Number two, I know that for myself, there wasn't a lot of injury against me, physical injury against me, except unintentional flailing of arms, banging, rearing back of a head. So keeping that in mind, I know some parents actually are enduring intentional harm against themselves, and you really have to do what's safe. I remember talking with Tony Hoy and reading in her book, Second Time Foster Child, about how she would, you know, they actually had to separate their household, and how she would hold her son in a hold. And there were a very limited number of times that I had to do that with my child. And it was mainly so that she wouldn't hurt herself, like when she was flailing and banging and things. But I too had a mantra, which then leads me to how I handled when my child was really losing it. And that came out of that paradigm shift. And I think the mantra I had that I used to self-soothe myself was, this isn't about me. She's not doing this to hurt me. She cannot help herself. She literally cannot help herself developmentally, even if this child had not endured some issues in the early developmental period of her life. Even if this was a child who we might say is neurotypical, no issues early in life, kids have tantrums. Once we start realizing that they are not doing that to drive us nuts, we can calm ourselves better. Also, saying things like, this is not a reflection of my parenting. You know, because my child is losing it right now does not mean I'm a bad parent. It doesn't mean I don't love my child. So it sounds like both you and I came up with these mantras to self-soothe ourselves. Also breathing in and breathing out. And I also found that the more I learned to try to regulate myself at other periods when my child wasn't losing it or didn't need extra help and attention, that then I was in a better state when they did need me. But I think for not forcing things. So what I learned was in the beginning, I could not hold my child. She could not handle that, but she did not want me to leave. So I learned to sit on the twin bed next to her bed and just listen. So be a listening presence to all the pain that was flowing out of her, because she had her own loop that she was in, and I won't go into it, but she used to say statements, and I would just affirm them. I would nod, that's very hard, you know, and acknowledging all of her pain was again not a reflection on me. It's like when I work with couples, I say, agreeing with your spouse's position or being empathetic with your spouse's position does not mean that you're saying their point of view is correct for you. All you're doing is saying that given everything they're going through, that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah. So we're just doing that with our children. We're just saying, given everything you've been through and how you're feeling today, and the fact that, you know, you went swimming for 3 hours and your friend's parent forgot to get you a snack and give you some water, and so now you're totally losing it, you know,
Yeah.
that totally makes sense, you know?
Yes, exactly, exactly. The reason I said strong as steel, steady as stone is because it was to reaffirm for myself, me being soft with him did not mean I wasn't strong.
Right,
Because
right.
that's how it
Oh,
felt.
yes, yes. And
It,
I will tell you that I think culturally and definitely certain periods in time in our culture, there has been this feeling that if you say you're sorry to your child, if you do a redo any of that, that you are then weak.
right.
If you ask for help, you're weak. And that is not the case. And in fact, that's why I think part of why I love Brené's work is because she really is working on trying to change that cultural message. Oh,
Yes,
when I ask for help, I'm actually being very courageous. I'm leaning in. I'm not being weak. That's a brave thing to do. And when I'm giving myself grace, or I'm telling my child, oh, I made a mistake there, that's really a strong thing to do.
absolutely. And her work has absolutely changed everything for us. I don't know if you know, have you seen the
Yes.
coloring book? Have you seen?
Yes, and I remember even way back when you were saying you had put the mantra all over the house,
Yes,
and
yes. I
yes,
didn't know if you had seen the coloring book that we did though. But yes, that but yes, that was it for me. It was like I I am not being weak. So saying, you know, strong as steel, steady as stone, that's where that came from, of me just thinking, okay, I have to remind myself that I am not being weak by being soft with him in this moment, you
hmm
know,
hmm
which is hard. That was a hard shift because because there is so much expectation to get this behavior under control.
yep,
Okay,
excellent.
golly, I feel like I could talk to you forever. Um, I'm
Well, thank
so
you, thank you.
Yes, this has been so great. I'm definitely going to have you back again sometime.
Well, thank you, Tip. I thank you so much. My passion in life is if I if I can help families, I really want to, and I want them to know that, you know, they don't need to be in this on their own.
Yeah, I absolutely. And again, I'm so grateful for you to take the time to be here. I know you're super busy, and I'm just really grateful, and I'm sure that this will be really helpful for a lot of parents. So thank you so much, Jane.
And thank you, Tiff, for everything you're doing. I love the packet. I love the fact that it has really important information, but it's presented in a very digestible manner. So thank you for that work, and to your team.
Thank you. Thank you too. Okay, we will talk again
Yes.
soon, I hope.
Have a
Okay,
good day. Take
bye-bye.
care. Bye, dear.